Welcome back, students. Tonight, we will talk about how neurons work, and then I'll introduce you to the basic parts of the brain. Let's begin by recalling that all of our organs, including the organs of the nervous system, are made up of tissues. For example, we previously discussed that a muscle would be composed primarily of muscle tissue. Well, just like muscles are primarily made of muscle tissue, the organs of the nervous system are primarily made up of nervous tissue. The basic unit of the nervous system, of the nervous tissue that makes up the nervous system, is called the neuron. When we say basic unit, remember that we just mean the cell that primarily makes up the tissue. We have looked at the structure of neurons before, but today I'm going to describe to you how they work. So let's begin by recalling that the job of a neuron is to transmit information around the body. This information is conducted as electrical signals, and those signals are called impulses. In a neuron, the impulses begin at the structures called the dendrites. On our picture down here, the dendrites are labeled. They're these branching processes, kind of like tree branches coming out of the top of the neuron. So our electrical signal begins here at the dendrites. From there, the electrical signals must pass through the area called the cell body. Okay, so that's labeled here. The cell body is the main part of the cell, or the center part of the cell. From there, the electrical signal goes to the axon. That's labeled here. It's this long stem-like structure. And you'll notice that along the length of the axon, it's covered in a substance. That substance, so you see it here, like just little bits of it all the way along the axon. That substance is a fatty lipid substance called myelin. And the reason that myelin is there is because it will insulate the axon and prevent the electrical impulse that is traveling down the axon from leaking out. And by doing that, it keeps the electrical impulse moving forward and moving forward quickly to, so down the axon, down the axon to the end of the axon, which branches out. You can kind of see the axon ends up branching at the end. Okay, so once the electrical signal gets to the end, let me just draw really quickly to remind you. It starts here in the dendrites. It goes to the cell body, and then it goes all the way down the axon till it gets to one of these terminals at the end. Okay, so now it's got to move to the next neuron. But there's a problem because there is a small space between the end of the axon and the dendrites of the next neuron. This space is called a synapse. And it's shown in our diagram here. If we see, they've circled this area where one axon ends almost on another dendrite. So here, what you see in that picture is a magnified version of what would be going on in this red circle. Okay, so the synapse is the space in between the end of one axon and the surface of the dendrites of the next neuron. And so what we need to do is we need to get the electrical signal, which ended here, to start up again in this dendrite and get passed down the next neuron. So, how does your neuron do this? Well, you will notice that stored in the end of the axon here, we have these vesicles. That's a word from earlier in the year. Those are membrane-bound little packages of chemicals. Okay, so this, for instance, is a vesicle. Inside the vesicle, there are chemicals. When the electrical signal gets to the end of the axon, what will happen is these vesicles will move towards the cell membrane at the end of the axon, and they'll go through endocytosis, which you learned, again, a process you learned about earlier in the year, to release the chemicals from the end of one axon into the synapse, into the space. And then what will happen to those chemicals is they will diffuse across the synapse until they reach the dendrite, the surface of the dendrite of the next neuron. And there, the chemicals will attach and they'll cause this neuron to send its own electrical signal. This signal will continue down the next neuron in the same manner as the previous neuron, switching from electrical signal to chemical signal, and then at the next neuron that will be switched back to an electrical signal, and so on down a chain of neurons until the signal gets to its desired target, either a muscle or an organ or maybe even up to the brain. Okay, now we're going to take a look at the brain. The brain is divided into three basic parts. The first part is called the cerebrum. The cerebrum is the large wrinkled structure that I'm going to outline here. So all of this outlined area is part of the cerebrum. The responsibility of the cerebrum is to control thought, to interpret sensory information, and to initiate movement, which means telling the muscles to which muscles to move and when. It's a lot of those three things encapsulate a lot of big, important tasks, and so we see, especially in humans, the development of the cerebrum is large compared to all the other parts of the brain. The second part of the brain is the cerebellum. That word looks like cerebrum, but it's different. It's cerebellum. The cerebellum is located here, below the cerebrum. It's that structure, and I guess I probably should have told you this part. This is the back of the brain. And this is the front here. So for instance, your eyeballs would be out here. Connected to your brain by a nerve like that. Okay, so this is the front of your brain, and this is the back of your brain. The cerebellum is below the cerebrum and towards the back. The cerebellum coordinates movement and balance, allowing you to do such things as walk without falling over or throw an object with a smooth motion. Finally, the third part of the brain is called the brain stem. The brain stem is the structure here that connects the rest of the brain to the spinal cord. The brainstem controls the most basic of life functions. Things like controlling your heart rate, your breathing, your sleep and wake cycles, etc. Because these most basic functions are so critical to keeping an organism alive, injuries to the brainstem are very serious and often result in death. Okay, on that note, I know we have a little bit left on this slide, but we're going to stop here for tonight. Don't forget your Quizmodo, and I will see you in class tomorrow.